Welcome, everybody, to Radicalized Truth Survives, episode 141. Today, Jim Hi-Fi and I bring in our friend, geopolitical analyst Joni Askola from Finland to help us make sense of a truly, truly frightening week in a world at war. Have a listen. Right. Joni Askola, great to see you. Jim Hi-Fi, super stoked to have the crew here. It's been a really weird fucked up week. It feels like it's been like a decade of news in 1 week. And I'm continually thinking about what one of my allies in this fight once taught me. Her name is Dr. Ruth C. May. She wrote the very first article for the Dallas Morning News on Putin's proxies and all the money that was getting pumped into the GOP. This is many years ago now. And she told me, don't worry, it's going to all turn out all right because eventually the evil people turn inward and devour each other. And I don't know that it's all going to turn out all right, but I feel like this is a week where some of the evil people are turning inward and devouring each other. But I don't even know where to start, gentlemen. But I guess we start with what I always think is the most important. When you have these huge geopolitical events, Yoni, I always want to know who's benefiting. How is it benefiting Putin? He's been the head of the Hydra in the information war that we have been exposing, but also now, of course, we are dealing with, very real kinetic wars. And so just kind of break down for us some of the recent events. And then I want Jim and Hi-Fi to jump in. Obviously, Jim's been chronicling everything as it's breaking. So let's just start somewhere.
Yep. Thanks for having me on again. Yeah, I think China and Russia both get some benefits from this. China gets a lot of benefit in terms of the US and the Western focus being on Ukraine and on the Middle East at the same time. So there's no focus on Asia and there's no pivot to Asia. So in that sense, it's good for them. But also in terms of soft power, it makes the US look like an aggressive nation, and it makes it easy for whataboutism arguments to be used. So in that sense, China is profiting from this, but China and Russia both have positive and negative sides coming from this. For China, Iran is a big provider of energy, and if Iran cannot provide that, that's an issue for them. For Russia, there's also downsides to this, but Russia and China are both known to be quite good at improvising and trying to make the best out of situations that are both good and bad for them. And Russia is going to go all in on staying as close as possible to China, and also on trying to make the West look aggressive and look like the aggressor. And also in dividing the West, dividing the US. You will have a lot of people who oppose these moves that will be made, but you also have people who support them. Same in Europe. And also it takes resources away from helping Ukraine. If, for example, European countries want to order something from US defense manufacturers to be produced for Ukraine, it's easier for Trump to say no because those will be going to Israel or to Iran or for the US. So in that sense, there's good sides for Russia. Our last point also is that Russia received thousands of Shahed drones from Iran, and the way Iran was supposed to be paid was through new jets, Sukhoi 35 jets coming from Russia, but also help on its nuclear program. And my guess is that if the regime in Iran falls, for example, Russia is never going to pay them and they're never going to send the jets to Iran. So in that sense, for them, it's also quite a good deal to receive everything they ordered and then after that have the regime fall. But of course, there's also downsides for both of them. This axis of evil, let's say new axis of evil that includes Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. If there's two countries that are at war and that are not doing too well, it divides the resources and it also weakens the whole anti-Western axis. So overall, it's a complex situation. And as we discussed before recording this, you have Netanyahu and you also have Russia and Iran, and they're all in some way, Iran and Israel both kind of like Putin, but at the same time, Iran and Israel are enemies. So it's a very complex situation, and some sides will have to be picked. And for Russia, it's not too easy, but they're quite good at that. So interesting times ahead, but I don't doubt that Russia will try to make the best out of it.
Yeah, thank you for that. And before we actually started recording, we were talking about how these uncomfortable allies, they can turn on each other at any time. And I think we're seeing that both internally in America, but you also brought up a really important point, which was, wasn't there supposed to be some sort of pseudo isolationism happening? And how does that factor into what's actually going on now, coming out of basically the Trump crumbling administration? I want Jim to talk about that too.
I'll go first very quickly, and then I let Jim talk more about it. But yeah, as we talked earlier, this whole isolationist movement behind Trump has been a very vocal and very loud minority. And if you look at polls today, and we look at Republican voters who voted for Trump, many of them are still classic GOP neocons who are ready to intervene in the Middle East and who are ready to support action outside the US. One reason for that is that China and Russia and many influential actors, such as the oligarchs from the Silicon Valley and so on, who are isolationists and who like to push Russian interests, they have been very vocal because they have access to social media platform, lots of media. They have a lot of money, and they also have bots on their side. So they've been good at making it look on Twitter as if that was a huge movement, but in reality, it's not a very big movement. And we can see it now that this isolationist camp is somewhat silenced around Trump, even if Trump in general likes to defend Russia and likes to go their way. But on the Middle Eastern questions, he is not thinking like that. And in the Middle East, Trump is very loyal to Netanyahu and to Israel, as he was during the first term as well. And that's what we also discussed earlier, that people like Kash Patel and Hegseth and Gabbard and so on, who are more inclined to support Iran and Russia, they don't have a lot of a say right now because they don't get to give their opinions because they disagree with Trump. And on other questions like Ukraine, they might get their say, but on this one, they won't. And it's a very complex situation, but it really shows that this isolationism and this pro-peace ticket that Trump was selling is a scam, or at least it's a very selective isolationism that doesn't apply to everyone. It applies to helping Russia take Eastern Europe, and it probably applies to China getting some pieces of Asia, but it doesn't apply to the Middle East. And it will be interesting to see what happens in the next few days with the decisions Trump will make, but the situation doesn't look like it will de-escalate.
Wow, Jim.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, I think what we're seeing in the U.S. Is a fracturing of Trump's coalition along the lines of this new conflict. It's fairly straightforward. Trump's election was the collaboration of lots of different interests, right? You had the Russians and APEC and the Israelis and all kinds of other interests that came together, plus hardcore Christian elements, including Christian Zionists, who are also extremely pro-Israel, but only because that's where Jesus is going to come down and pick them up, right? But anyway, all of these elements came together to get him elected, and now Trump has made the decision based on Bibi Netanyahu, and I think that's important as well, to effectively choose a side, to pick one of the components of his coalition that brought him to the dance. And that is I don't see them being silenced. Honestly, I see Tucker Carlson eviscerating Ted Cruz about this. Steve Bannon is going ballistic. Alex Jones, people like Nick Fuentes, all of them are have been, really, really pushing hard back against Trump. And I think that's a non-trivial thing. I think it's a real potential fracture. I think the next one will be China, because you have this whole other anti-communist, we have to get China. You have those hawks now. And so, the coalition that Trump built, or was built for him, in my view, is crumbling, and I think that gives us an opportunity right now.
Wow, that was amazing. And, I keep on always hearing things that our previous guests have said. And I don't know if you remember when we had Jeff Charlotte on either the first or second time, but I will never forget when he said, these are going to be some really uncomfortable bedfellows. This coalition around it's going to be like a, really, really seething hot mess there. And yeah, I think that's what we're witnessing in real time. High Fidelity, what is on your mind?
I can't help but think about this whole situation because we know some of the people who are, in charge of the Pentagon. Hegseth, we know he's a Christian radical, right? If he was Islamic, we would call him, ISIS or Al Qaeda. That's how radicalized this man is. We look at who picked him, Eric Prince. We know Eric Prince's history. We know that Putin is involved with Netanyahu. We know that Putin is involved with Iran. Um, it just feels, and I try to put myself in someone else's shoes here. I am not a Muslim, but I'm trying to imagine if I were a Muslim, my reaction not only to Israel's war crimes in Gaza, but now this war out of nowhere in Iran. Now, yes, you could say it's Netanyahu just trying to stay a hold of power, right? We know the populace hates him and wants him out of office. Um, but at the same time, it also feels like Israel is doing everything in its power to piss off the Islamic world. I don't know if that's intentional, but it also feels like a setup for the rest of the Islamic world to start attacking Israel.
Well,
And
it's not Israel. They're going to attack us. That's what, if you, not to jump in, apologies, but
go
my
ahead.
my big concern about this is, because I think you're exactly right. Netanyahu is pissing off the Islamic world intentionally, because that's what he's been doing for his entire career.
Yeah.
He is deeply religiously anti-Muslim. He wants to eradicate them from the from Israel. He is a war criminal for a reason. And so my big concern is that this gets the radical Islamist um, crowd riled up, and we start seeing terrorist attacks in the United States. Now, however those actually happen, and I would not put it past this administration to do false flags and things like that. However that happens, my big concern is that then becomes the excuse for the militarization, the martial law in the United States. We have to protect you, and now we go to full war in the Middle East. To me, that's a nightmare scenario that I see this lurching towards. Um, not so much. Israel is sealing its own fate right now.
Well, okay,
Wow.
so I don't disagree with that. And I do see, I mean, if America is attacked, if the United States is attacked, or if Israel attacks, the Christian nationalists in this country will holler for blood. Um,
Mhm.
Now, if they do it in this country, more of the country is going to join them in that chorus. If they do it in Israel, people are like, yeah, okay, but it's not American
Well,
soil.
no, what you're bringing up though, High Fidelity, and what Jim just delineated is that thing that we have been worried about and predicting, because again, anything like this could just light it up and give this administration, whatever you want to call it, an excuse to declare, the type of state of emergency that they will use against its, our own citizens broadly. And so, Yoni, with your geopolitical analytic brain, when you hear this kind of stuff, what does it say to you, or how do you see this playing out? Because I see nothing good coming of it.
I see two scenarios, one of which is the one that was described just before, which is a possibility that the Muslim world really turns even more on Israel than what's already the case. But I also see another option because obviously Israel has committed tons of war crimes and so on, and is hated by the Muslim world because of that. But Iran is actually hated by Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Morocco, and all the countries basically that have signed deals with Israel in the last few years. And those countries were against Israel in Gaza, but in Iran, they actually support Israel. They were not going to say it out loud because they cannot, but they hate Shia Muslims and they're Sunnis themselves. And that makes the whole thing even more complicated because you have this option that you have the whole Muslim world going against Israel, but you also have the option where you actually have Israel kind of becoming closer and closer to the Sunnis, which is also going to be the case maybe in Syria at some point if the situation between Israel and Syria comes down, because the leadership of Syria hates Iran as well, because Iran had been playing a big role there under Assad. So you have Syria, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Morocco, and so on, Azerbaijan, which is very close to Israel. So you have some part of the Muslim world that is kind of happy with what's happening, but they cannot say it. But then, of course, you have all the Shia Muslims and all the proxies of Iran who are going to be even more extreme than before and who are going to be ready to commit terrorist attacks and so on. So it's a complicated play, and it doesn't make the operation less risky in any way, but it just that's the other option that could happen with this, and that is quite different from the first scenario in terms of the consequences of this operation.
Oh my God, it is so diabolical. And Jim is in Los Angeles, where there was a very, very big freaking week. And Jim, both domestically and internationally, as you're looking out, like, do you see all of this being connected? Everything that happened in Los Angeles with turning the military on citizens. And I don't know if there's any way to describe it in any cohesive way. If anybody can, it's you.
I mean, yeah, it is it's the he wants the militarization. He wants a military dictatorship. And yeah, I've written about this very clearly. There's 5,000 armed troops 10 miles from me. What the fuck? Guarding 1100 Wilshire Boulevard. 5,000 armed troops. Those men and women are not there to protect 1100 Wilshire Boulevard. They are there for an occupation, right? They have already announced they're going to replicate this operation in specifically democratic cities all over the country, right? It is a military operation. What ICE is doing is doing psychological warfare on Americans. That's what that is. You go in there as hard as you can into elementary schools and middle schools. You grab people off the streets and throw them in vans, and you get people, understandably, very angry. And when they righteously protest, you crack down, quote unquote. They landed 2,000 National Guard here yesterday. On the same day, the mayor canceled the curfew and was like, "There's nothing going on here, guys." So to me, you know, all of the domestic aggression is just matching up with what I'm seeing with the foreign aggression, which is that we have a desperate, shrinking administration that has curdled itself down to Stephen Miller and, you know, the hardest core people there is. And by the way, Stephen Miller, hardcore Zionist, pro-Israel, trained by David Horowitz. So there's a lot of connectivity between the reason why we're going, you know, full bore pro-Israel across the pond, and also trying to crack down on immigrants here.
And Yoni, one last question for me, and then Hi-Fi take us home. And thank you so much for this brilliant conversation, you guys. It's so difficult to hear, but it's so important that we just keep informing people to the best of our ability. Um, Yoni, one of the great things about being friends with people like you is you are always able to view things through that information warfare, active measures, asymmetrical warfare lens. And so often when you see what's happening on the streets in America right now, and obviously on the global front, is there anything that you can tell us from your history of kind of studying this stuff that you've seen before and what we can possibly expect next, good or bad?
I actually haven't seen this before because I've lived in Russia, and in Russia, obviously, the system is different because it's way less democratic than the U.S. and they're much further in that process. So there, people don't dare go on the streets, at least not anymore. So I don't have. Maybe Hungary is an example that could be compared to, but it's something that I haven't seen or experienced myself before. Obviously, as discussed earlier, I think that this is all linked to intimidation and psychological warfare. They want to make it so that people who could protest don't dare do it and just let things happen and don't make any move. And that's the most dangerous, when people start to censor themselves and not do anything, because in most cases, when people do something, the government cannot be there everywhere to stop you from doing it. So in most cases, obviously, it's hard for me from Finland to tell people in the US to go on the streets and to protest. And it's also important for people not to fall into the traps that Trump is setting, and not to become violent, and not to give them the images they want to have so that they can justify anything. But I think peaceful protests are something that helps, and they don't have enough National Guard people to cover the whole country. So if people actually take this seriously and use the opportunity now that they are divided and they are weak, and there are Republicans also and voters of Trump who don't agree with his policy, if people use these opportunities and unite, it's possible to do something, because he cannot send 5,000 troops on every street of any big city in the US. But his bet is that people will not do it because people will be scared. You will have the most hardcore people who will, and then they will get nice images from them because they will fight with the police or with the National Guard, and they will get that. And that's exactly what they're looking for. And yeah, it's a
Yeah.
psychological operation.
No, that's exactly what I was getting at, how much of it is psychological. And I keep looking at Belarus, and, Belarus is an example where, people are languishing in prison, and I'm worried how far out we are from that. But I think you're 100% right. Now would be the time to not back down. And High Fidelity, final thought, either of you, final thought, final question.
Jim? Okay. Here's my only final thought is we've talked about, you know, America going to war with Iran. We've talked about Shia extremists and terrorism. Last time there was a terrorist attack on American soil, that was really big. It was 9/11, and we know that was done by Saudi Arabia. And an outcome of that is we ended up with the Department of Homeland Security and ICE. And we are now seeing how those things are being utilized against the American people. My only concern is if it happens here, we're going to get something a lot worse than DHS and ICE.
Mm.
Yep. Where I mean, there is no difference between functional difference between Germany in June of 1933 and where we are right now. It's a carbon copy. We've got Gestapo running all over the place, grabbing people off the streets. They're arresting. They've arrested judges, Congress people. They tackled and manhandled a senator. They took the National Guard away from the governor. I mean, all of it is about trying to eliminate those
Let's not
freedoms.
forget.
And
political assassination has occurred in the United States.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I mean, it's
that's
unfathomable. I mean, it's just like, yeah. I mean,
so
and
so
all just in the course of a few days.
yeah. So we're in a slide, but that slide also has had consequences for the regime, and I think we are in a moment where we can take advantage of that. There are enough real fractures on the other side that we may be able to take a longer term win out of this than we expected.
Thanks so much for that, Jim. And I do have one final thing because I always like to bring it back to Ukraine. And I know that Yoni has been so focused on raising money to get trucks to Ukraine, bringing, trucks to frontline workers. It's just incredible work that you do. And I always want to bring it back to Ukraine because what happens in Ukraine defines the future, certainly of Europe, and certainly defines how much longer the Putin regime lasts, which again, I believe is the head of much of this hydra. So any concluding thought you might have on why we can't take our eye off what's going on in Ukraine and how it factors in to everything that we've discussed here today.
Yeah, thank you. It's something that Kaja Kallas, the ex Prime Minister of Estonia and currently works for the EU, she said recently, I think a couple of days ago, that if Ukraine doesn't win, then some countries in Europe need to start learning Russian. And that's a real thing. Right now, we have the first proof of new bases on the Finnish border with actual new brigades being moved to our border. And I'm not too worried for Finland. I don't think we're number one on the list. We might be number three, number four, something like that, which is still not good. But Ukraine is really key. Russia is behind all of this. It's not the only actor behind it. Trump and many other actors around the world who do bad things are supported by Russia. They also have other supporters, but taking Russia out takes a big one out of the equation. And obviously, we're not going to take Russia out in the sense of completely making it disappear. But if Russia cannot reach its objectives in Ukraine, then it won't be able to reach its objective elsewhere. And it will also weaken the regime because Russia is all in and Putin's legacy is based on that. So even if he manages to sell some lies to his population now, in the long run, he's not going to be able to lie if he doesn't manage to get anything big in Ukraine. So in that sense, Ukraine is key. And I hope that the US would still allow at least to buy equipment from the US, from the EU. But I really hope that Europe also wakes up because Europe has been waiting for Trump. And I think it's horrible to wait for Trump and Putin to decide our fate because they're people who don't have our best interest at heart. So I think Europe here will really have to step up, and the big countries will have to step up much more than they have done until now. And that's what's going to decide our future here. But Ukraine is really, really important, and they're really playing a big role. If we look at just 1 second, but if we look at what happened in Iran, Israel's air force is smaller than Russia's air force, and Israel managed to dismantle Iran's air defense and air force in just a couple of days. The fact that Ukraine is still capable of flying in the skies and of keeping Russian jets away is just really impressive. And Ukraine overall has been brave and courageous, and they've fought really well. So let's hope that they continue that, and that we need to support them for that to be possible.
Thank you so very much for that. And yeah, I think Trump's appearance and disappearance at the G7 kind of said it all there. Thank you guys for a very brilliant conversation.